If I can do it, what's your excuse? What's holding you back or what's stopping you? Go on and do it. What's there to lose? If I can do it, what's your excuse? Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I want to invite you to another episode of What's Your Excuse? I am your host, the blind blogger, Maxwell Ivy. And if you want to find out more about the podcast or what I've been up to, you can go to theblindblogger.net. And if you have interest in learning more about accessibility, you can go to the accessibilityadvantage.com. And so this podcast is about sharing people with you who have overcome adversity or thrived in spite of difficult life circumstances in hopes that they will teach you how to overcome the excuses that are holding you back. And just for my visually impaired listeners, I am a 59-year-old Caucasian male. I'm a large man, medium length brown curly hair with gray and some white in it now, brown eyes. I'm wearing a white button down shirt and my Jerry Garcia tie, which is the red, blue, and purple that y'all are probably familiar with. And today I'm very happy. I'm going to be speaking with Teri Brown. She is I think, a lifelong award winning author who's written fiction, nonfiction, and even a children's book. We're going to talk a lot about her latest book, or at least I think it's her latest, the 10 Little Rules 10 Little Rules from a Double Butted Adventure, which features her cross country trip uh, as part of a tandem bicycle team, which I I have no idea how that works out. But and then also she has written a kids book, Lulu and her big dreams, and how to take on your big dreams in spite of uh, people telling you not to. So you can find her at Teri M. Brown, and that's Teri. So, Teri, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for your patience and perseverance as we were getting started this morning.
Thank you so much for having me, Max. I'm super excited to be here.
Well, I really appreciate that. And one thing I did find out about you when we were talking before is that you've been a writer pretty much your entire life, but it's only been in recent years that that has turned into a profession. Am I correct about that?
Yeah, that's true. So as a child, I said I wanted to be an author, but I also said I wanted to be an Olympic ice skater. And given how klutzy I am, that was never going to happen. I don't think I really understood what I wanted. I knew that I loved books. I loved reading. I loved everything there was to do with writing, but I didn't actually start doing anything with writing until 2000. And then it was nonfiction, and I was a ghostwriter, and I was working with small businesses, helping them do things. So I didn't get my first book published until 2022. So it's been very recent. And since then, I've had 3 novels, my 10 Little Rules for Double-Butted Adventures, and like you said, my children's picture book come out.
Yeah, and I'm really impressed with the kids book as part of this because there seems to be a reluctance to encourage young people to go after big dreams in the society today.
Yeah, well, I hate that. I always encouraged my children to dream big. If they had a dream, let's see what can happen. The really interesting thing about this book, I wrote it because on our ride across the United States, we rode along a train line and saw these trains over and over and over again. And I just started, imagining, and I had this story in my head. And Lola decides that she wants to be a space engine, like an astronaut engine. And all her friends tease her, tell her there's no such thing. She goes and talks with older train engines, hoping that maybe she can discover what she wants to be. And in the end, she decides to hold on to her dream. Well, no sooner did I get it written, and all of a sudden there was an article in the paper, and it was NASA and Northrop Grumman plans to put a railroad up on the moon. The purpose is because they want to build a permanent space station, and they're going to be able to need to transport goods and people from the light side over to the dark side of the moon. And so in my author note, I tell the children that they're now planning this station, and that you should keep your dreams. Because at the time I began writing, there was no way that Lola could have been an astronaut engine. But by the time I finished writing, there was a way for her to be an astronaut engine, and so that we need to dream big and keep those dreams even in the face of opposition.
That often happens with a book. The book is intended to have a message, but the process of creating the book has an even bigger message.
Yeah, that's true. It's very interesting how that works. I've had a couple of books do that. My Sunflowers Beneath the Snow is about 3 generations of Ukrainian women, and it came out in January of 22, 1 month before the current Ukrainian crisis.
Wow, what timing!
Yeah, like over and over things like this happen to me. So I've been teasing people, telling them that my next book is going to be about world peace.
Well, if you're going to dream big, it don't get much bigger than that. So, and as you were telling the story about the space engine, I was actually thinking of I guess it's my 3rd book where I chronicled my trip to New York City, and one of the best stories in there is about how I managed to get so many great photos of a trip for a blind person traveling solo. So so lots of those stories happen to us. I just wish more authors would include them, because quite often authors come off as being different than the rest of us, being superhuman, and not being willing to let us see behind the curtain and realize just how hard this was for them.
Yeah, I'm just the opposite. In fact, I think sometimes people think I share too much. My life is really an open book. When and I mean that very literally. There's very little that I will not tell you about. There's a few things that I find private, but generally speaking, when it comes to my life and how I lived it and the decisions that I made, both good and bad, and the experiences that I had, both good and bad, they made who I am. They're all part of the puzzle pieces that made me, and I don't have any problem sharing them.
Right. So for the people who are just meeting us for the first time that probably are wondering, why was Max laughing so hard at what she said? It's because over the years, many coaches have told me, they've said, Max or Mr. Ivy, I know your brand is authenticity, but could you be a little less authentic?
Yeah. My mom several times has said, do you think maybe that you need to like tone it down a little? Do they need to know everything? And it's like, Mom, it's fine, really. But
Yes. So, speaking of things that are hard, you've been married, you've been divorced a couple of times, you've had really good experiences, really bad experiences, and I imagine that some of that is also part of your writing, and of course it was also part of the Double Butted Adventure book, if I understand correctly.
Absolutely. So I married. I had 4 beautiful children. My husband and I were just not compatible. That we could not find a middle ground to save our life. So we got divorced. We've remained friends, but we could have never been married. It just wasn't. It was a bad match. I remarried. He turned out to be emotionally abusive, and I stuck in that marriage for 14 years because I didn't want to be divorced twice. I felt like, who wants that kind of label on them? I finally got out of that relationship, and then I married Bruce. He's the one that we rode across the United States on the tandem bicycle, and unfortunately, in January, he passed away from glioblastoma. So I'm not winning in the marriage department. I did with him. He was probably the most perfect person for me that I could have ever found, and unfortunately, brain cancer took him from me.
Right. Well, you mentioned you have not won in the marriage stakes, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
Does anybody really win? And is the idea that winning is possible make it harder on folks?
I don't know. In a lot of ways, when I say I didn't win, I did. With Bruce, I even told him, he asked me while he was, he knew that he was dying, and he said, if you'd known that I was going to get this brain cancer, would you have married me? And it kind of stopped me in my tracks, because that, it's like, and then I said, yes, because married to you one day would have been worth it. I truly did win in that department, but unfortunately I didn't get to stay with the marriage because of his death. But no, marriage is hard. I mean, even though he was the perfect person for me, it doesn't mean it was easy. I think marriage is it's hard. You've got 2 people who are trying to find a way to meld into one another in such a way that we can do life together. And that's not an easy endeavor. But going across the United States on a tandem bicycle with someone is like 20 years of marriage. And we learned quite a bit about each other in those 3 months.
Yes, I can't imagine that. I have never ridden a tandem bike with anybody. The closest I come to it is at scout camp one year. We had a competition where people used the big old crosscut saws, so that
Yeah.
you had to push and pull in tandem, or
Right.
you either wouldn't cut the log or you would get injured. So
Right.
that's the closest I ever come to riding a tandem bike at all. But I imagine that you learned a lot more than the 10 lessons that you put in the book from this experience. So why don't you first tell people where the idea came from? What caused you to want to do this in the first place?
So I got out of the abusive relationship in 2017 and immediately started writing. Like words started pouring from me. And I also felt like I needed to prove to the world that I still had value. Now, as it turns out, the world did not think I didn't have value. It was me, after having lived in this abusive situation for so long. But I kept dreaming in my head of doing something really big. And my son has a friend who walked the Appalachian Trail that same spring that I left that abusive relationship. And I read his blog the whole way, like a drowning woman. Like I couldn't get enough of what he had to tell me. And so I don't know, I had this idea that maybe I'd walk the Appalachian Trail or I'd do something like that. Then I met Bruce, and Bruce has wanted to ride across the United States on a bicycle since 1976. A group of college kids did it. And he was in the military at the time. It's not like he could drop what he was doing and go ride with them. But for 40 years, he had been saying, I really wish that I could do this. He told me about it. And immediately I thought that would be an adventure. I hadn't been on a bicycle in 40 years. So this was way outside my comfort zone. And I just looked at him and said, is this something you're going to talk about forever? Or are you going to actually do it? And he said, no, I really want to do it. I said, then count me in. Probably 8 or 9 months later, after that discussion, we got married. And then a year after we got married, in the summer of 2020, during COVID, we rode across the United States.
Well, that was a good time to do it. There wasn't as much traffic because everybody was staying home and indoors.
Yeah.
For the most part.
So for that part, it was good. It was harder to find places to stay. It was harder to find stores that were open. There were trade-offs. So we got some good and some bad. But the best part is that while everyone else was stuck indoors feeling like their life was over, we were having the adventure of a lifetime. And, when people talk about that period of COVID where everyone was locked down and they all get kind of that glazed over look, I don't have that because we didn't have that. I mean, for the first couple of months we did because we were home like everyone else. But come June, we were gone. And all of June, July, August, September, and part into October, we were out in the world riding our bicycle. And it was beautiful. I'm so glad that we chose to do it, even though we had a lot of people telling us, you shouldn't go with COVID, you shouldn't go. And we finally decided, well, we're going to go. And if it gets bad and we can't go any further, we'll rent a car, put our stuff in it, and come home.
Right. You mentioned that COVID was a little of good and bad.
Yeah.
I like to joke with people that vision loss is kind of that way. And I use the example of going to a beach, and I say, when you're blind, you can't see the people wearing the skimpy clothes on the beach. But you also can't see the people who shouldn't be wearing the skimpy clothes on the beach.
Yeah, when you said that, I started to snicker to myself because I thought that might not be a bad thing. I live at the beach. Some of the things that you see on the beach, you cannot unsee. That's for sure.
This is true. So once you decided you were going to do it, what were some of the things you did to prepare to do it? And maybe you could share something physical and something mental or emotional that y'all did to prepare for this long cross-country trip.
Yeah, so there was a lot of physical preparation. Like I said, I'd not been on a bicycle in 40 years. So we were talking about getting me first just to be able to get on the back of this tandem bicycle and feel comfortable back there. Bruce would tell everyone that the first ride we ever took together, I had so much fun. And he said it was the worst ride he'd ever been on because it was all he could do to keep the bike upright. So I didn't know what I was doing back there. But in the process of our dating and then early marriage, we rode over 1,000 miles. And that was the physical preparation. The mental preparation, you know what? I don't think you can do enough mental preparation for an adventure. And you really can't do enough physical either. On the very first day, I thought to myself, we've bitten off more than we can chew. What are we doing? This is crazy, right? It was absolutely crazy. But I don't know, mentally, I think that what I did was in my head, I just started to imagine myself doing it. Like I really did. I would put myself on the bicycle in my head and I would think, okay, we're pedaling 40 miles. And other things that we did physically, we would go and ride a certain number of miles. But in my mind, I would say to myself, well, if I can do 50 miles today, then that means I can make it across the United States. Like I had little challenges that I gave myself. And as I completed each of these challenges, I felt more and more confident that I could make it. On day one of riding, I thought, whoa, I've bitten off more than I can chew. But when I went into it, I felt rather confident, all except for crossing the Rockies. I was very terrified of that portion of the trip.
Well, that is a very physically dangerous part of the trip. So it was totally natural to be nervous, concerned, worried, whatever word you prefer to use for that time.
Yeah.
As I think about what you did, one of my favorite authors is the blind adventurer Eric Leomir, and him and his climbing buddy. Their first thing was to climb 5 flights of stairs with a full pack, and a few years later, that led to them climbing Everest. So,
right,
what you shared there of having a goal where you can say, if I can do this, I can do the whole rest of this adventure.
Right,
it's a great lesson for my listeners. So, you learned a lot. And as I mentioned, I'm sure there were probably more than 10 rules you could have put in the book from this trip. So, and one of the ones I really want you to speak to today is one we talked about previously, but I want you to speak to it because you actually really helped me while I was traveling a week or so back, because I had a really bad day where I fell on a sidewalk in Chicago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And it took more than just me and my host to get me back up again. And the rest of that day, my hosts were very cautious with my well-being. We sought out ramps and took elevators. For the rest of the trip, I actually felt like I kind of understood what somebody in a wheelchair goes through, because some of the building accesses were not humane.
They're horrible.
Very undignified is the word.
They take you through back entrances, and for the last probably 10 months of my husband's life, he was wheelchair bound, and I thought that we were doing a good job in the United States with the handicap access, and we're not. The number of times that he'd need to use the restroom, and we would get in, and that supposedly they have a handicap stall, but you can't get the wheelchair in and close the door.
Nope.
And it's like there's nothing dignified about that,
No.
And things like ramps that they have a ramp, but it's at the other end of the building, and so if he didn't have someone to push him and had to do that himself, the distance that he would have had to have gone just to get in the building. And we actually went to one doctor's office where they had a ramp that was too steep and I could hardly push him up it. And then when we got to the door, the threshold was at least 2 inches high. So I would have to turn him around backwards at the top of this ramp and then yank him over the threshold.
Right. One of the buildings we had to go to multiple times actually had an old-fashioned elevator with the grate that somebody has to push open and close. So they had a ramp, but the elevator was garbage. So, but that day was a bad day for me. And I thought, Teri said in her rules, don't ever quit on a bad day. So I thought, let's see what tomorrow brings. And in the next day, I actually got recognized at a conference that has nothing to do with disability or blogging or podcasting. I got recognized as the blind blogger. I got a hug. I went to, I did some great networking for my friends. I had some great food. The next day was much, much better.
Yeah.
But the whole time I couldn't help but think, Teri said, don't ever quit on a
On a
bad day.
bad
And I'd
day.
love for you to share where that comes from your experiences.
Yes. So riding across the United States is not an easy endeavor. And there were many days that were tough. But one day in particular, we were in Montana. We had to ride 70 miles that day. We averaged 40. So you can see that a 70-mile day was very big. And there was no option to stop anywhere else. That's why we had to go 70. Where we had stayed the night, where we were going to, there was nothing in between. This particular day was very, very hot. It was very hilly. The wind was blowing toward us instead of behind us, pushing us. We were like riding into the wind all day long. We hit a valley of mosquitoes at one point, and I swear those things were eating the bug spray for breakfast. They were just swarming us. And then just to make it even a little more fun, the rear tire went flat, not once, not twice, but 3 times in that day. And so we would have to stop, take everything off the bike, repair the tire, put everything back on the bike, and start again. So by the time we were done that day, I was done. And I don't mean done for the day. I was done. I was quitting. I didn't want to do it anymore. I couldn't imagine that I wanted to do it anymore. I kept a blog the whole way across the United States, and there were several people reading it. I think mostly because it was COVID and they had nothing better to do, but they were reading this blog. And I put out on the blog, I think we're done. Like, this isn't fun. We have made it over the Rockies. We've gone about 1,000 miles. I'm done with this trip. And I had a friend reach out who said, Teri, you have done an amazing thing. And if you quit today, you don't have to hang your head. However, I recommend you don't quit on a bad day, because you'll always wonder if you could have made it. So why don't you find a way to maybe step back, take a break, think about it for a while. And then if you still come to the conclusion that quitting is the right answer, then by all means, you can do that and hold your head up high. Either whatever you decide, so proud of you. And she signs off. So I took that to heart. And the next day, we had a fabulous day. We made it into the next town in time to have second breakfast. We were able to stay in a hotel that night. We were in the hotel by noon. They let us come in early. We took a 4-hour nap, got up, had dinner, slept for 12 hours that night. And the next day, even though that next day, the 2 days after the really horrible day was a hard day again, we were well rested and could attack that day with no problem. And we eventually did make it across the United States, 3,102 miles. So I just think that, when you're tired, when you're discouraged, when you're hungry, when everything has gone wrong that day, it's so easy to just, I'm done. I'm just quitting in the moment. I suggest to people, I'm not saying don't quit, because sometimes quitting is the exact thing you should do. Like, I got out of an abusive relationship. I quit that relationship. That was exactly what needed to happen. Sometimes you're in a job that's going nowhere and it's not serving you anymore. And getting out of that would be the right thing to do. So sometimes quitting is the answer, but don't quit just because your boss was in a bad mood that day. Or don't quit just because you and your spouse had a little bit of a fuss at one another. Those are not the times to make decisions, because you can't do it logically. But once you've had time to step away from whatever it is that got you all into an anxiety and tither and angry and whatever, and you step away, then you can make real decisions and determine, is this really for me? And if the answer is yes, then you continue on. And if the answer is no, then it's perfectly okay to back out.
Okay, so if you decide that it's okay that you're backing out,
Mm-hmm.
then how do you deal with that? Because you mentioned not wanting to be a twice divorced woman.
Right. Right.
A lot of what we do next is affected by how we feel about ourselves, or how we feel other people will think about us if we choose to quit. So what does the person do after they decide, if they've gone through the process and they realize they need to do something different?
I think that it's easier when you know that you're doing the right thing for yourself. Because at least for me, when I recognize that I'm doing the right thing for me, what other people think doesn't matter as much. It's when I make decisions that I'm not sure is the right thing for me that I let other people sway me so much. So I think for me, it was just recognizing this is the right thing for me. I can't continue doing this. And it is far better for me to have a label of twice divorced and have a few people who, I don't know, shrug their shoulders at me and have a bad opinion than it is for me to remain in this bad situation. I think for me, it's just a mind over matter. I am who I am. I have to do what I have to do. And everyone else is either going to have to get on board or get out of my way. I don't know how else to put it, but I have kind of that personality. You either like me or you don't. And if you don't, then just move off to the side and go do your thing. We'll just avoid one another. So.
Right. So it sounds like you're saying that you have to take some time to get to know yourself, which is
Right.
hard in the moment.
Right.
And then decide what you really need, because once you decide it's something you really need, then you can do something about it.
Well, yeah, and once you decide it's something you really need, then when you have the naysayers, you don't have any issue talking to them about why you need this. Or if they're not going to be the kind of people that can be swayed, you have no problem just ignoring their advice. You just smile and nod and walk away. I've had people who offer me advice and I know what I need. And so you just smile and think, okay, well, thank you for your opinion. And you just walk on, and it doesn't hurt as much but if you're struggling and you're not sure, am I doing the right thing? Should I be doing something else? And someone does that to you. Now you're full of doubt. Now you take their words on as, somehow it's a description of who you are. And if you know who you are, then other people really, it's not that they can't dink your armor just a little bit, but they're not going to get inside and ruin what's in your head, because you know who you are and you know what you need. And I believe that all people already know what they need. They're just fearful of making those decisions. So you just have to kind of get inside of yourself and say, who am I? What do I need? And what do I need to do to get what I need?
Yeah. I personally have experienced a lot of doubt as to who I am at different times in my online career. So I've been blessed to have some people I've come to know very closely, both in person and online, who will help me either see things I'm having trouble seeing, or will remind me of things that are important parts of who Max is. So
Right. Well, and that's true. Sometimes we need reminders, and maybe that reminder comes from a friend or a pastor or a therapist or someone in your family, or a book that you've read, or something that helps you to remember, oh, I know who I am again. And that's kind of what my book, 10 Little Rules for a Double-Butted Adventure, is. Yes, it's about my ride across the United States, but it's really about 10 things that I learned about life. And these are 10 things that I think you can apply to any part of your life when you are trying to live just a little bit outside of the box that you've put yourself in. We all put ourselves in a box where we're very comfortable. We know what's going to happen today, and we know what we're going to do, and we know how people are going to respond, and we feel very comfortable. And then there are those things we wish that we could do. A little bit of dream-like things, or things that are a little beyond, and those are scary. And when you're getting outside of that box, these 10 rules are the things that can maybe help you navigate through that difficulty, because it's hard. It's so easy to stay comfortable. But when you're comfortable, you're not learning anything and you're not growing. And it's when you get outside of the box. Max, it's when you go to Chicago and you fall down and you get back up and you say, okay, how am I going to navigate the city this way? That's when you grow. You do not grow by sitting in your house.
Yeah. And as you're saying that, I think about one of my best friends, Lorraine Regularly, who's been the editor on my books, and she runs a company called wordingwell.com. She's been through a lot of stuff in her own personal life. She likes to say that Max gets into more, let's say, setbacks or adversity than any other one person she knows, but I always manage to find my way out of it and have a good story for people. So,
Well, and
uh,
so why are you finding so much adversity? It's because you're willing to get outside of your box. People don't really find adversity much if they insulate themselves in a tiny little space and they don't let other people or situations in. It's only when you're willing to put yourself out there that you experience the adversities that go with putting yourself out there. And then because you're the kind of person that you are, you find your way through them and you say, okay, now I know how to navigate that portion of life. Let's see what's next.
right. And one thing that you did mention that I feel is very important, and that has to do with honest storytelling. Throughout your cross country trip, you were blogging, and
Yeah.
you were obviously blogging honestly.
I
I really don't like the word authentically anymore because I feel like it's lost all of its meaning and value. But you were honest with yourself and with your readers in your blog, and that allowed you to be helped by people who were reading your blog.
absolutely. I read several blogs before we went across the United States, trying to figure out the best route, trying to figure out like difficulties people had. I wanted to kind of see if I could glean some information. And what I found is that most of the blogs from people who had ridden across the United States were liars. Like, no, seriously, they only told the glory stories. They only told on the good days when they were able to go 90 miles and they had no issues, or they would gloss over all of the difficulty and just show you them standing on the mountaintop with a flag at the end. You know, that's the pieces, and they weren't telling the whole story. So as soon as I recognized that, my decision was to write a blog and that I would be honest about everything. I would tell people what the temperature was like, how many miles we rode, what the terrain was like, and I would tell them what my mental state was like. Was it emotionally an easy or difficult day? Why I thought so, what I felt about the coming days, everything. And so I would describe everything. I would describe, there was a day that Bruce and I had an argument. I put that in there. I made sure that people saw that this adventure, though worth it, was not easy, and that it took a lot out of me, and that in the process, I also did a whole lot of growing. And I wouldn't have had 10 little rules for double-butted adventure had I not been honest in that blog, because when I got home and read my blog is when I recognized all of the lessons that I had learned.
Yep, you got home and realized you had a book.
I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had wanted a book. I was hoping that I would come out of it with a book, but I really didn't know what I would come out of it with. Like, I had no idea. Is it going to be just a blow by blow of what we did? Is it going to be a technical writing book for other cyclists? I had no idea, but I was hoping that I would come out of it with a book. And when I read over my blog, it was like, oh, what I have is a life lessons book.
Yeah.
Things that I learned about me, about others, about the world that I live in, all because I took this big chance and this big adventure and did something well outside my comfort zone.
Yeah, that's a great example. So, just as a reminder, I'm speaking with Teri M. Brown, a lifelong author, recently award winning author, writer of fiction, nonfiction, and a children's book on going after your big dreams. You can find her at terimBrown.com. That's TERI. And of course, I'll have her social media links in the show description. And you can find me at theblindblogger.net. I just like to remind people as we go along. So I've really enjoyed learning a lot about how the not quitting on a bad day applies. Is there one other of the 10 rules that you could share with us and share an example of how that was part of this big adventure y'all were on?
Yeah, I can share another one. It's a little bit of a sad story, but it's a beautiful story. So my husband was diagnosed with glioblastoma a year and a half after we got done with the trip, and he lived for 30 months, which is pretty surprising. The average is much, much lower than that. And I had written this book. I found a publisher. I was so excited about getting the publisher, and I was now awaiting my very first author copy. So he had seen the cover, on the computer, but he hadn't seen the cover yet. January 10th is the day he died, and on January 10th, an hour and a half before he passed, my author copy came. And I was shaking so hard I could hardly get it out of the box. And he didn't have his eyes open. I know he could hear me, but he didn't have his eyes open anymore. So I told him all about the cover. And then I crawled into bed with him and I started reading the book out loud. And I read the introduction. I read rule number 1, rule number 2, and I got to rule number 3. And I said, rule number 3, do hard things. And he passed away right then, as I said it. And I feel like I gave him permission to do something that was very difficult for him to do, which was, he was a 25-year Marine, and Marines don't give up. You're gonna do the mission. And I think I gave him permission to it's okay. You're allowed to do this. Also, in the last 2 months of his life, because of where his tumor was, he couldn't speak anymore. He understood words, but he couldn't physically say anything anymore. Every now and then he could say yes or no, but generally he had no words. I feel like they were his last words to me. Do hard things, because he knew for the next several months that I was going to have to learn to navigate life without him, and that was going to be difficult. So the lesson that I learned while riding the bicycle, doing hard things, going ahead and getting outside that box, making myself pull myself up from the bootstraps and figure things out when life was tough, is a lesson that helped me navigate this next part of my life, which is, how do I figure out what this looks like without, Bruce, who was really my person. He was the person who helped me understand who I was again, and helped me. I mean, he was my cheerleader. He felt like I was the best author that has ever, walked the face of the earth. He was that person for me. And so how do I live? How do I move forward? And so the number of times that I've gotten up in the morning in the last 6 months and said, do hard things, and it is the thing that propels me forward. So it's right now, it's my favorite rule. My favorite rule used to be never quit on a bad day. And right now, my favorite rule is do hard things.
Well, I imagine right now you have a lot of bad days, so the do hard things is probably a little easier one even to focus on.
Well, yeah, and it's a quick mantra that I can just do hard things, and then I go do it, and then I give myself permission after I've done the hard thing, whatever it is. I give myself permission. I'm allowed to grieve. I'm allowed to be sad. I'm allowed to have a bad day, but there are still things that have to be done in life. And sometimes you just have to take the deep breath and go do it anyway, even though you would rather not.
So. I thought you were going to say you allow yourself to celebrate accomplishing those hard things each day.
Well, I probably should. I haven't gotten there yet. I think,
okay. All right.
I think that this whole grief process, eventually, I think I'll probably write a book about that too, because I've read books on grief, and it doesn't seem to come close to capturing what actually happens in a person's world when they lose someone close to them. And maybe it's not capturable. And I think partially it's because everybody is so different, and there's no one right way. There's no one wrong way. It's very nebulous that way. But I haven't gotten to a point yet. I more or less grit my way through it and do hard things. But yeah, the celebration, I like that idea, Max. I think I'm going to put that down somewhere and see if I can't find a way, maybe not daily, maybe once a week, sit down and look over my week and say, okay, here are the things you did. Let's celebrate.
Right. And another way,
I like that idea.
And
if
the word celebrate is not quite the right word for you, another way you could look at it is just to express gratitude for being able to overcome those things and accomplish those things.
Right.
I'm not known for it, but I like to tell people that a vision board is much more effective with a gratitude border.
Yes, I think that you and I talked about that when we had our pre-meeting, and I loved that that idea with the gratitude border. I know that something that I've tried before, I haven't done it lately, and I actually need to get back to it, and this is a good reminder, is at the end of every day, I would like to write down one thing I was grateful for.
Yep.
And on easy days, days that went well, finding one thing you're grateful for is super easy. But on the hard days, it's a lot harder. But when you do it, then you can start recognizing that even in the very worst of days, good things do happen. And once you can do that, and you can be grateful, and you can be grateful for the fact that, this good thing happened, then you start to be able to look for those good nuggets throughout your day.
So are you sure we're not connected on some, familial level here? Because I talk about this very same thing a lot. And I even have an expression for it. I tell people that that finding the positive or finding things to be grateful for is like finding the TV remote. You decide it's there, and then you look for it until you find it.
Right.
And
right.
then, once you make the daily practice of efforting to find something positive in your day, then, as you mentioned, it becomes a habit, and you start to see more and more things, even in really bad days. So I'm sitting here listening to you explain this. I'm like, yeah, it sounds really familiar. I think
really
I said that.
Yeah, well, people call me the silver lining queen.
Okay.
Because I'm the one that bad things are happening, and I'm looking for the silver lining. Let's find the good in this. What is the good in this? And so, people talk about COVID and I say, yeah, but some good things came out of COVID, like Zoom. Everyone now knows how to do this. I can now meet people all across the world easily, and could not do this before 2020. Not that Zoom didn't exist, but everybody didn't know how to use it. Now my 82-year-old mother can do this. We can now meet people. And so, was COVID horrible? Well, yeah, there was a lot of horrible things about it. And yet there were a few good things that came from it. And so I'm always looking for that silver lining. I'm always trying to find, okay, yeah, it was a horrible experience. The whole day was horrible, except for, you do remember that point where we really laughed real hard because whatever happened, and we laughed until we had tears in our eyes. I'm grateful for that moment.
Right. Well, in my family, especially my brother Patrick likes to joke, Max, I think you could find a blue cloud in a hurricane.
Yes. Yeah. And isn't that wonderful, though? Because it's so much healthier to be optimistic. It's so much healthier to have hope. It's so much healthier to have gratitude than it is to be the opposite.
Yes, it is. It is so much healthier. And I've been blessed to see my brother and my nephew become less negative over the years that we've been living together and sharing this house. And I didn't want to end today without commenting on how, for a lot of people, COVID was very, very challenging, stressful,
it was.
Very hard. For a lot of people with disabilities, COVID was really just another day because there's a lot of isolationism within the disability community. There are a lot of us who pretty much never left our houses before COVID, much less during or after COVID. And as I tell people, at least in my community, COVID was a good thing for me because it meant I had more options as far as things I could get delivered to my house.
Exactly. And so that's another silver lining. All of the delivery services now and the other things. I live in a community in which, when COVID first started, there were no delivery services here. No one delivered here. There was nothing. And so I would have to drive to a grocery store, and you could order online and let them deliver into your trunk. Right. Now it's 5 years later. Everyone delivers here now because people realized, we need to start delivering. And once it started, now it's become an avalanche. And so everything can be delivered here. Small things. COVID was a horrible thing. I'm not saying it was good. I don't want anyone to misconstrue what I'm saying. But
a lot of good things did come out of it.
Because of necessity, people had to turn and essentially punt and figure out, how are we going to do life? Yes. And because of that, we were inventive, and those inventive things have made life post-COVID easier.
Right. The other really good thing from COVID is COVID gave a lot of people the freedom to do things they had been putting off doing for most of their lives.
Max, do you know how many people? So I have a podcast, and it's called Online for Authors, and I chat with indie and small press authors. And the number of people who've said, "Oh yeah, I started writing during COVID." It's incredible the number of people who wrote their first book or who wrote the book that has been on their mind forever or whatever during COVID. That's when they said, all of a sudden, I had the time. And time is a precious thing. And I wouldn't want COVID back. I'm not saying that. But to be able to take a bad thing and flip it into something that was worthwhile. So people who wrote, my husband and I who wrote across the United States, all of these things that could happen during COVID that might not have been able to happen at another time because of the time that we were given. You know, do I want COVID again? No, absolutely not. On the other hand, wow, some of the things that came from it really have turned out to be beautiful.
Right. That's just like when I tell people that this finding the positive exercise, I'm not telling them to ignore real grief. I'm just
Right.
telling them that the positivity exercise can help them get through it a little easier, you know.
I think that people believe that you can't have good and bad living in the same space. And that's just so not true. We have good and bad living in the same space all the time. For instance, my husband passing away, of course, is not a good thing. I miss him terribly and I very much want him here. And it's also a good thing because he was suffering and he had an incurable cancer and he couldn't do the things he loved anymore. And he was tired and worn out. And so I am both grateful that he was able to pass and I am sad that he had to pass. So you can be both grateful and sad in the same breath. And it's okay. And I think a lot of people feel like, well, I can't be sad and grateful. Like, how do you do that? And you can be. And it's not only is it okay, but it's actually very human. And we've tried so hard in our lives to say, well, I can only be happy or I can only be sad. And it's like, no, you can be both at the same time.
Yeah, it reminds me of the line from the second Oh God movie with George Burns, where speaking as God, he says, I never could figure out how to build a top without a bottom or a left without a right.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I mean, I'm a firm believer in you can't you can't know pure joy unless you have known the opposite. Like you have to experience both. You can't know happiness. How would you know what happy was if you didn't experience sadness so that you would know what the difference was? Because happiness all by itself, if you've never experienced sadness, would be normal. You wouldn't even know you were happy. You only know you're happy because you know what sad feels like. There's two sides to every coin and you need both of them.
Right. I totally agree with you. When people ask me, Max, how do you become so resilient? I say, from spending a lot of time landing on my backside and
Yeah.
having to get back up again. So,
Right. Right.
yeah,
I think resilience comes about with, the first time you fell, did you get back up? You started adding to your resilience bucket. And every time you fall and get back up, you add to your resilience bucket. And if you're willing to look at the success you had getting back up rather than the fall, that's how you become resilient. If, however, you keep focusing on the fall and not focusing on the I got back up afterward, then if you focus on the fall, you're not going to be resilient. But if you focus on the look what I did once I fell, the fall was inevitable, right? I mean, everybody's going to fall at some point. What did I do once that happened? And if you can focus on the look at what I did afterward, then you become a resilient person.
yeah. I'm reminded of going ice skating at Rockefeller Center when I was in New York in 2016, and I fell down. And I asked the skate guard, I said, would you take a picture of me lying on the ice? He said, why would you want a picture of yourself lying on the ice? I said, because the next picture is going to be of me standing back up again.
Right. 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 And I love that. I love that you are vulnerable enough, willing to be vulnerable enough to allow people to see, look, we fall down. And you're not the only one. Because every single person has fallen. And most people hide that portion of themselves. They don't like anyone to see the dirty, unkempt part of themselves. And it's like, yeah, but we all have it. We all make mistakes. We all
Right.
make judgment mistakes
The
about
more,
people and places, and the more you live, the more likely you are to make those mistakes. But what do you do afterward? Do you
right,
get back up? And if you're getting back up afterward, then that's the whole point.
right. And the sad thing about all of this is that the more we are willing to share both the bad and the good of our lives with people either in person or online, the more attractive it makes us, the more real it makes us,
Yeah.
the stronger bonds we build with people, even strangers we'll never meet. And it's just amazing how few people in 2025 understand the value of being vulnerable and letting people see.
Right. Right. And I think I have just found that, yeah, people really respond to hearing your whole story. And once they've responded that way, I have people come up to me that have heard me speak, at a library or something, and they'll say, "Oh, I know you don't remember me, but I saw you speak." And they feel like they're my friend now because they've heard me talk. And the reason they feel like they're my friend is because I opened up. I was vulnerable. I let them see me. And that being an author isn't necessarily easy, and that my life isn't necessarily easy, but I still keep going forward anyway. And people need to hear that. There are so many people that are struggling, and they struggle alone, and they struggle silently, and they don't want anyone to know. And then they hear someone like you or me talking and saying, "Hey, I struggled, and here's what I did, and here's how I got out of it." And it gives them some hope, because they've not felt that hope.
Right. Well, I've been talking with Teri Brown, and quite frankly, Teri, I could talk to you all day. I really enjoyed our conversation. I feel like I've learned something. I'm hoping that our audience has learned quite a bit about what it takes to go on these big adventures, and how to come up with your own rules for your own adventures. So I appreciate you coming on the podcast. And if you could close with a final thought for our audience around their own adventures, I'd really appreciate that.
Yeah, so my thing that I tell people now is get rid of your bucket list. Go
Wow.
make it a to-do list. Find something on your bucket list that really means something to you, and find something today to do to start moving toward that. The day that I decided we were riding across the United States on a tandem, I couldn't have left that day. I had a lot of work that had to be done, but you can start doing one thing. Is it a little bit of research to find something that you're going to need? Is it ordering that first pair of jogging shoes? Is it whatever is it? Go do that one thing today and take that thing off the bucket list. I hate bucket lists. I do not want to leave this earth with a bunch of things I wish I had done. I would rather leave this earth with a list of things I was in the process of doing.
Or with that one thing that really speaks
Right.
to your heart that you're in the process of doing.
Right. Right. That's what I want. I don't want a bucket list. I don't want things that I wish that I had accomplished.
I wish I'd have known to ask you this question sooner. That's a very powerful thought to end on, girl. No bucket list, y'all. And work on gratitude and celebration too. So I really appreciate you, Teri. Y'all can find her at terimbrown.com, and that's TERI. You can find me at theblindblogger.net or theaccessibilityadvantage.com. We're working on a maxiv.com website where you can find everything in one place, but you know how it is. Small steps, y'all, small steps. So
absolutely.
Yes. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope that you'll join us again next time when we have another amazing person to come on and share some actionable tips to help you overcome the excuses that are holding you back. And until next time, please do take care out there. I'm the blind blogger, Max Ivy. And this has been another episode of What's Your Excuse? If I can do it, what's your excuse? What's holding you back, or what's stopping you? Go on and do it, or what's there to lose? If I can do it, what's your excuse?
Item chooser menu. 153 items. 88 StreamYard. Studio. Camera and mic closing. Item chooser menu. One item pause button. Pause button and stream button. You are current. End the stream and outro video. Outro video. Set outro vid not yet. End stream button.